Hello and welcome to Café New Canadians. This is a virtual event series where we chat with experts, industry experts, immigrant achievers for their tips and advice on how to help newcomers navigate their career, hunting for a new job, changing their career stream, building skills, education, settlement, and a lot more. And of course, we're going to be talking about all of that in the context of our present realities with respect to COVID-19, which has completely changed how we live, work, and learn. Today, we're going to be talking about that one important question that every newcomer gets asked in their job interviews about their work history in Canada and what they have to offer in terms of their experience. And today's virtual event is brought to you by New Canadians, which is a television and web-based series for newcomers in Canada. Through our television show and through our social and digital media platforms, we bring you trusted resources and information and advice from experts on how to navigate your newcomer life in Canada with respect to employment, settlement, education, and a lot more. You can watch us on Omni Television, on YouTube, our channel there, and also on our website, newcanadians.tv. And of course, you can follow us across our social media platforms. I'm your host for this evening. My name is Vasudha Sharma, and I'm very pleased to welcome our guest expert for today's edition of Café New Canadians. Please welcome Brian G. Bachand. He is a career specialist, an interview specialist, and a career evolution coach. He's also the founder and CEO of Evolution. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Okay, so today's topic is no Canadian experience. How should newcomers deal with this dilemma? And of course, throughout this live chat with Brian, you can interact with us live, sending your questions by tapping on the Q&A tab on Zoom. We're also being live streamed on YouTube. You can interact with us there, send us your questions, and I'll post that question live to Brian and bring you your answer. Okay, coming back to our topic for today. Now, before we kickstart, Brian, how are you doing these days?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's challenging times for everyone, but staying grounded and being focused, but doing well.
Absolutely, aren't we all? Now, Brian, a lot of newcomers, in fact, most newcomers often get asked this question about their work history in Canada. Why is such a question posed newcomers, given that they're recently landed in the country? How do they navigate this question? How do they respond to such a question?
Sure. So, as a newcomer, when you arrive here, it is so challenging in so many ways as you get settled and beginning the job search. And finally, when you get to a job interview and you're excited to share about your history and where you come from and your expertise, usually one of the first questions is they will say, so how have you worked in Canada? What's been your experience? And, it's not a bad question. It's a legit question to be asked. But a lot of times they're asking that just to understand, how long you've been here and why you are here and have you had any experience? So it's not necessarily a bad question, but it's one that they're trying to understand your history.
Sorry, I was on mute. So what is the inherent intent behind asking this question? What are hiring managers trying to ascertain when they ask this question from a candidate?
Sure. So, there's a few things. I think, in the current situation that we're living in right now in COVID-19, it's changing everything in the workspace. The myth of certain jobs can never be done at home. Certain ways of doing things, that those myths are now being exposed. And the Canadian experience question is, I think, one of those questions and myths that will start to disappear. And when they asked that question originally, it's really to assess, how are they going to integrate into the company? What are they bringing? Why are they there? Are there going to be any barriers? And I think, the best way to approach that question is you have to be confident. And as I always share with individuals, it's better to bring it up yourself before it's asked to you.
So in articulating and communicating that confidence, how do they craft their message? Do they rely on their previous experience in their home country where they have immigrated from? Often those companies may not be known, those institutions, those brands may not be known in Canada. So how do they back up their claims and their confidence?
Yeah, so the best way to approach the question, and this is the advice that I've given to so many newcomers who come to Canada over the years, is the following. At the beginning of an interview, there's always the more general question of, share with us a little bit about your background, share with us why you're interested. And it's in that moment where it's very important to bring up that you are a newcomer, and to address it very directly in the sense of saying, I am a newcomer. I have not had the privilege to work yet in Canada, but of all the countries I could have immigrated to, I chose to come here to make an impact for myself and on the country. And I'm sure you'll learn as I share with you about my background, how that aligns possibly for this opportunity and to make an impact together.
All right. A question of workplace culture. Often hiring managers, their feedback would be probably they're not sure of how this candidate would fit in with their workplace, whether they're aware of the workplace culture, their practices. Is that also a challenge that newcomers face?
I think so. I think sometimes it can be, but I think it can also be on the part of the company as well. I think, one of the aspects is that companies and organizations have to really just be very open. When someone is coming who may be a newcomer, that can enrich their organization. It can make them even richer in how they're going to achieve their goals, because someone has brought an international experience. And I think for the newcomer, they also have to be open to adapting, definitely adapting in their style, because sometimes individuals, when they come from a different culture, may have a different approach of how they interact with colleagues, socializing, how they deliver messages, etc. So it's on both sides, that both the individual and the companies both have to work together to understand, to make sure there's an alignment for success in the new job.
Mm-hmm. Brian, I want to quickly get a pulse of our audience today. What are they feeling regarding this topic of Canadian experience? Mm-hmm. Let's bring our first poll question on our screens right now. I want to know, do you find yourself at a disadvantage as a newcomer looking for jobs without Canadian work experience? Yes or no? Because often in those initial weeks and months when you're new to Canada and you're applying for a job, it weighs on you emotionally and on your confidence. You may have come with a decade of experience working with the best brands in the country, but you probably start self-doubting yourself. So I would love to know what our audience thinks about this. Okay, so coming back to the cultural fit, we also have a question on this, and then we'll come back to the poll results. Ankit Chaudhary wants to know, does the question of Canadian experience have anything to do with having a good cultural fit? Will the candidate be able to adapt to a particular organization's culture/environment?
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question. And I think, with the Canadian experience, organizations and companies certainly do want to make sure that individuals will adapt in understanding, not only the job requirements, but also the cultural norms as well. But I take it also from a different point of view as well, that I think, for individuals who are newcomers here, they bring a wealth of experience, and they bring leadership, they bring expertise. And just to come to Canada is such an incredible feat on its own. And I think organizations also have to realize and know that just sets newcomers apart, because they bring an energy, an enthusiasm, a dedication. And I think that's really important that they demonstrate that when they go for interviews.
Excellent. We have the results of our first poll. We asked whether newcomers felt at a disadvantage, and 95% of them say that yes, they feel at a disadvantage looking for jobs without Canadian work experience. And very soon in this conversation, I'm going to discuss with Brian some tactical tips to overcome this challenge. So coming back to what you said, there seems to be a disconnect in the expectations that newcomers come with, and because they apply through the federal program or through other programs, through student visas. But when it comes to the job market, the expectations of employers are pretty different. You may be skilled in the eyes of a federal program, but not in the eyes of the companies who are actually hiring. How do you respond to this lack of this confusion?
Yes, and that can be quite disappointing when you arrive, knowing that you have, been approved to come. You bring a skill set and an experience, and then you're finding block after block after block. So I think there's a few things, and I'm not surprised by that poll. I'm not surprised that it's not 100%, that it's just 95, because I think that is the number one obstacle that so many newcomers face, and they're not alone. But there are also so many newcomers that have overcome that obstacle, and I think they have to see that as an inspiration and hope as well, that they too will also move forward. I think there's a few approaches and things that newcomers can do that can help them through that challenge. First of all, there are some incredible programs here that can help be a bridge to help them find that Canadian experience. For example, there's a fantastic organization called Access Employment that I personally have been very involved in for a number of years. And there are incredible programs there that can help them to refine their interview skills, how to bridge that conversation about Canadian experience, how to also develop and bridge relationships and network for companies that are hiring, that do want to welcome newcomers. And I think that's a very important step. And I think it's very important to tap into the network. Your network is so important because at the end of the day, relationships are so critical, especially when you're interviewing. And in building those relationships are ways to overcome some of those barriers that so often you face with that newcomer experience question.
Right. Brian, we have viewers joining in from, immigrants joining in from Australia, Mexico, and a lot of newcomers from India, now in Toronto. Brian, you were a newcomer once. What did you do differently? How did you change your approach? You moved from Boston to Toronto many years ago. How was your journey like?
Sure. So, I think for all the individuals who are watching now, so many have had much harder journeys than I did. I just came from south of the border. I actually moved here. I was born in Boston, but I moved here from New York City. And I came in 2012, and now I'm very proud to be a Canadian citizen and a US citizen as well. And I think, when I came here, I was very fortunate that there was an opportunity quite quickly when I arrived. But I have to say, one of the challenges that I felt for myself is I had to adjust the way I presented and interacted, sometimes in communication. Coming from New York City, as I'm sure so many people have watched films and movies, New Yorkers can be very direct. And so my style was very direct. And I found when I came here, I had to be careful of, sometimes it would be very normal in New York, my tone in an email or how I interacted or delivered news might be interpreted very differently in Canada. And I think that is the same for so many that come here from different cultures. And we have to be very sensitive to that we have to hold ourselves accountable to how we interact with each other and how we integrate. That was probably one of the biggest aspects. I think the other aspect too was just building my network here. Although I had a significant network in New York and south of the border in the States, I had to build a new network here. And that took time. And it took time to reach out and connect with individuals and organizations that aligned with where I was at and where I wanted to be. And I think that really, really is so helpful. And that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give to newcomers, to really focus on building a network, one person at a time.
Right. Now I want to take up those tactical tips to start building that Canadian experience, and how to get your foot in the door. And probably a good audience question to segue into that is from Komal Akut. Komal asks, do hiring managers require Canadian experience in their respective fields to hire a candidate? Or do survival jobs like call centers, grocery stores count as Canadian experience, since we are exposed to Canadian work culture even in survival jobs? Now, that's something that newcomers often get advised to take up any job in a store, to work in Tim Hortons or a supermarket. Does that qualify as work experience? And what else can they do?
Mm-hmm. So I think, survival jobs are sometimes very necessary, especially while you're in that transition and you're trying to find the job you really do want. In my opinion, yes, they do count. And the reason they count is because you are here making an impact. You are deciding to invest in yourself. You're here to make sure that your bills are paid, that you're integrating into society. Those are probably not the same jobs or qualifications in the fields that you're looking for, but it certainly shows to an employer that you are being proactive in really integrating and really trying to delve right into your career. I think one point that it is important, though, if you're in a survival job for a short period of time, you may or may not have to speak about that in an interview process. I think it depends on how long you're there, what kind of job you're going for. So I think you just have to be open-ended on that. But I think, definitely if you're in a call center and, it may be 6-7 months, and then you land a job that you really do want, I think it's great to show that, during this transition time, I did that. I enrolled in a program to further my education. And I think those are very positive aspects. And it's always about how you present it confidently, and you express that during an interview.
Brian, we have an outpouring of questions from our audience today. And I know you are also so passionate about this question. When we discussed the topic for this webinar, you were very insistent that we must talk about this myth of the Canadian experience. A question comes in from Amin Mosawi. He wants to know, what are the important soft skill requirements for the Canadian workplace?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat the question again?
Amin Mosawi wants to know, what are the special soft skill requirements for the Canadian workplace?
Perfect. Yeah, I was missing the word soft skills. So I think, number one, first of all, it is all about your presence. I think that is a soft skill that so many people underestimate, in how you present yourself, in being aware of that. And what I mean by that is, your presence is really something that is very important about how you interact. Do you look people in the eye when you speak? Do you say thank you? Do you follow up with an email? How you communicate is very, very important. We live in a time right now that everything is very quick, and everything is all about technology right now, especially that we're all working from home during COVID-19. So the way that you communicate in an email or a text is really going to reflect on you, and it says a lot about your presence. Those soft skills are very important in every culture, but especially in the Canadian culture. Respect, and that is something that is really, really important to always remember.
Right. Another pain point for newcomers is their resumes actually going into this black hole and not getting any responses. Akanksha Agarwal wants to know that, they reject your resume, or that your resume doesn't go past just the email. How do they overcome that? What are the tips to actually start taking action, taking steps into your own hands, and not waiting for a reply for a resume?
Right. I'm so happy that question was asked, and I personally have experienced that as well. And I think so. A couple things. It's everyone talks about you have to craft your cover letter and your resume to have certain keywords, et cetera. I agree, for certain positions, you may have to do that. However, I think one of the most important things is if you apply for a position online and you really feel, you just have this sense, wow, I want that position. That just aligns for who I am and where I am. One of the tips to take, and this really works, is to try and find out who the hiring manager is. Oftentimes when you apply online, it will say, please do not contact us. We will be back in communication with you. But if you're really committed to one particular role that you feel is just drawing you, see if you can find out who the hiring manager is. Send them an email with your resume and always let them know that you have applied through the natural portal that, the way they wanted you to apply. But say, I also wanted you to be aware of my application and I wanted you to personally have my resume. And you can also sometimes follow up on LinkedIn that way as well. Maybe you can't find who the hiring manager is, but you find out that there's someone that's listed there who might be part of that team. You can always reach out there in a very polite way. Always do it as, I just want to let you be aware of this. Here's my resume. Here's my information. Welcome to hear from you. I did that once for a job. And I remember connecting with the hiring manager and she said, I never received your resume from HR, but I'm so glad that you reached out. And I got it. And I know it works. And so in this time in COVID-19, even more so, where even more people are looking for jobs, we have to be creative, yet very respectful in reaching out to those individuals where we can make our name and our resume known.
Right. We have a question from Jair Hernandez. He asks, what are the don'ts in an interview if a newcomer is involved?
So I would say this applies probably to everyone too. I've seen so many interviews. And so I would say you don't want to show up late and you don't want to presume anything going into the interview as well. You don't want to take anything for granted. So what I mean by that is you want to be prepared. You have a right to ask who will be interviewing you. You want to do your research before you go in. And I think especially as a newcomer, that demonstration of research that you do on a company before you go in is really going to set you apart. And that is quite impressive for those who are around the table. I think another important aspect is as a newcomer, especially if this is your first time in North America and maybe going for more interviews, is to practice interviewing, whether with someone professionally or someone who's a mentor or someone who is currently employed, because that can be very helpful in terms of kind of working out some of those questions and how to answer questions well. And I think that is something that's very important. I think a lot of newcomers, they're so nervous sometimes, like everyone who goes through an interview, myself included, that I think it's very important to, the more you practice and the more you can be at ease, it will really help build your confidence and make a very positive impression.
Brian, you have a rich recruitment experience. You've interviewed countless candidates. What is going on in the mind of a recruiter or hiring manager? What are they looking for in an interview, be it any candidate?
Sure. So when I would do so many interviews, the one thing I'm looking for is consistency of character right away. From the moment I would speak with a candidate on the phone, to their emails, to when I meet them in person, I'm looking for consistency of character. And what I mean by that is I'm looking for someone that, how do they interact? I always knew that when they spoke to me on the phone, they were always going to be nice. When I walked into the room to meet with them, I knew they'd be very respectful. But I also am looking for some of the ways, how did they treat the receptionist when they walked in? I used to always ask the receptionist or the person who greeted them, how were they? Did they say hello? Because the way they treat everyone who through the process is truly going to reflect on them. And during an interview process, there's a couple things that I would pay close attention to. I would pay close attention to eye contact and how people engage through the interview process through that. Number two, I think it's also very important to be aware of the length of your answers. And sometimes when we're very nervous, we can speak a lot or we won't speak enough. And so I'd always kind of pay attention to that. I think that's very important to how people speak and to be prepared with examples. Especially as a newcomer, it's very important to be prepared to share very concrete examples from your professional background that could really align well with the job you're going for. Because the more concrete you are with an example, the more it will engage the employer and the person who's listening to the interview.
Now, volunteering is the easiest and fastest route to step foot in the professional work environment. And Joe Pham has a question in that respect. He wants to know, as a newcomer and a student, would it be appropriate for me to utilize volunteering in my college and community events as Canadian work experience?
So volunteering, for myself, volunteering is so rich, and it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that I know so many are. And so I think volunteering is wonderful personally, and it can help expand your network. I don't see that companies and organizations may not always see that as Canadian experience. They see that as volunteer experience. I think it's an important piece, and I think it's something that can help you when you're trying to build your network in particular. That's very important. So if you're volunteering, I think it's very important to be observant of how the organization is running. That's a great way to practice those soft skills about your presence and being there. But it's also a sense of just building your network. Pay attention to the people you're meeting. Listen to where they work. Maybe you want to meet with them after to have a coffee with them, learn about their experience, who they may know in their network, who they could introduce you to. So that's where I see volunteering having a very important part as a newcomer and helping you enter into the Canadian workforce.
And along with volunteering, I think networking and building those essential connections at the companies that you desire to work in, that's pretty important too. And Rahul Mehta has a question regarding networking on LinkedIn. He says, what is the most subtle approach to initiate a conversation which might lead to a referral or a professional contact?
LinkedIn is critical, and I am a huge believer in LinkedIn. And so I encourage every single person who's on this webinar to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is really up to date. And it's one of the best ways as a newcomer to meet people. I think when you're building your network on LinkedIn, you have to be very careful. There's two very particular points I wanted to make on this. First is, as you're reaching out to individuals to connect with them, do not just send random invites to connect. Always send a message. There's always a sense when you're looking to connect that you can write a message. Use the person's name when you reach out to them and tell them why you want to connect. It's okay to say, I'm reaching out because your profile was really caught my eye. I was very impressed, and I'm reaching out for networking purposes. You'll have a much higher rate of people accepting your invitation if you put a note with it. And after someone accepts your invitation, you can then follow up to say, I would really welcome the opportunity to have a very brief conversation or maybe a Zoom. I'd love to learn more about the work you're doing. I'd love to share a little bit more about my process, where I'm at. And people are quite receptive, but don't send an email or a LinkedIn message saying, I'm new here, looking for a job in finance. Anything you can do to help me would be great. Most times people are not going to help you. It's about building relationships, and that takes time. You have to nurture it. It's very important. But if you put the thoughtfulness into it, you put your presence into those messages, it really will come back to you, and it really will open up much wider for you. So I think that's an excellent question that was asked.
Okay, and to our viewers watching us, we'll continue to bring you meaningful content over the next few weeks given that we're all working virtually, staying home, staying safe. And in the next few days, we'll plan another virtual chat with a LinkedIn expert, Shelley Elsliger. So stay tuned to New Canadians. Now, coming back to, now I want to talk about the whole mindset aspect of this job search. Now, that's very personal. You're very passionate about that topic, Brian. You speak about that your evolution personally and professionally is in your hands, and it's very critical for where you are and where you want to go. It helps you bridge that distance. We have a question from Dylan Scammell saying, is there a difference in this question for newcomers in Canada versus newcomers in USA versus newcomers in other countries? Do you think this is just those initial emotions about facing rejection and not getting any headway? Maybe that's not the right way to think about this ongoing journey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so I think one of the things that's really important for every newcomer, whether they are in the process of coming to Canada or the United States or to Australia, wherever they may be looking to immigrate, there's a lot of emotion attached. You're leaving family, you are, uprooting yourself in many ways to begin a new life. And that takes such courage. And that just says so much about who you are as a person. And I think it's very natural once you land and you're kind of gotten settled into your new home and you're getting used to getting health cards and your bank account and figuring out, public transport and adjusting, especially if you have children with schools, et cetera. It's very natural because you're anxious to land a job. You want to prove yourself. You came all this way. You every ounce of your fiber is ready to just really embrace where you want to be. And then to get questions like, you're amazing, but you don't have Canadian experience, can be so deflating. And I think the difference is you have to be very confident, going back to that courage to board that plane, to come to a new country, to realize that it is part of the process. Part of the process sometimes is not everyone, even if you're a native citizen, gets the job they apply for. That's okay. But I think it's the way that you approach it of saying, how am I going to present myself? Knowing that probably they're going to ask me about Canadian experience, let me bring this up before they bring it up and really show them why I'm here, how I can make this impact. I think it's also important to have good support around you. After an interview or as you're preparing for an interview, to have those individuals that you can reflect on, that you can learn from and be open. That will just boost your confidence each and every step of the way. And it really does make a difference. Being grounded in yourself, making sure you take good care of yourself, preparing for the interviews, celebrating the successes as you go along, and learning really will help you. And celebrating when you land that job.
Brian, some newcomers have questions about having too much experience and maybe that working against them. Ahmed Sadiq wants to know, will the hiring manager eliminate their resume because they were in a managerial position in their past life and now applying for a lower position?
Yes, that's a real question, and that happens sometimes. And I think a lot of newcomers face that because they've applied for positions, let's say at the same level, and they're not getting to move forward because they don't have Canadian experience. So they sometimes go for another position that might be lower. They get the interview, but then they're told they're overqualified. So my advice to newcomers is always the following, especially if you're coming with a wealth of experience, and especially in leadership roles, like so many newcomers do. I think it's important to be realistic that you may have to go down in your position title. Maybe it might not be the same as what you had when you were in your country you're coming from. But you don't want to go too far down either, because that's going to be harder to then move forward in the years ahead. So I think it's a mixture of being patient. And I think it's also a mixture of also looking for positions that are going to qualify you. You want to be at the right level. And if you go too junior, it can work against you, because the fear of the employer is, you're going to be here 6 months and then you're going to be out the door looking for something else. So that can work against you if you go too low. So you have to look in a realistic frame of where you want to land for the next position.
Let's get a sense of where our viewership is today in terms of their experience and what they're doing to build experience. So what are you doing today to build a history of work experience in Canada? Are you volunteering? Are you interning? Are you taking a bridging program? Are you changing your career and going back to school? Are you networking to build connections? So what are you doing to build a history of work experience in Canada? Punch in your answers. You can punch in multiple answers as well as a multiple choice poll. Lots of questions coming in. Okay, the poll results are out. 82% of our viewership is networking to build connections as a way to build their work experience or get a foot in the door. 32% are volunteering. 47% are taking a bridge course, taking a bridging program, and only 16% are changing their career. What do you feel about these results? 82% networking and a big chunk also taking a bridging program. What do you think about these two groups?
I think that's the right place to be. I really do. I'm so happy to see that 82% are at networking. I am a firm believer that networking and building relationships and taking the time to connect is really the best approach to landing any job. I know personally in my own life that every position I've ever had came through networking and building relationships and listening and really being open. And I think for newcomers, that is so important, whether you do that through LinkedIn, other social media platforms, through networking, through your community. There's so many things that are available, especially even more so online now. That is the best way, because when you apply for a position in a certain organization or a company, you never know from your network who may work there. And reaching out to that individual and saying, hey, I applied, I just wanted to put this on your radar. Oftentimes they become an internal ambassador for you. And so networking is so powerful. And bridging programs, like I mentioned, and Access, and I know Rotman has programs, there are so many. That is an incredible, positive way to build for your future and also build a network within those bridging programs, which is amazing.
Right. But along with networking, you need to back your networking, your connection building with relevant skills. Taking from my experience, I was in journalism in the content space back home in India, but when I moved here, I had to take some relevant certifications and learn some online courses to be able to exercise my actual foundational skills. In that respect, we have a question from Anjali Rego. She says, jobs in media, communications, and marketing require language of the local market, which is often demonstrated through work experience. How do you demonstrate your knowledge of the local market with local experience? Would you recommend studying, taking a certificate?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that I recommend right away. There's always education, there's always programs you can certainly get involved in, but I think it's also important to look for internships. Some of them could even be unpaid internships or internships that are paid to gain some of that experience. Because that's incredible Canadian experience, especially if you're in one of those fields that you just mentioned, that really can help build credibility for yourself. You're building a network, you're building an understanding of the local markets, the local culture of that organization and how it works. And that's very, very important. And I think that's a great way to be open to that. I think for some of those other areas that you mentioned, the other occupations, there can be volunteering even in those organizations sometimes. There can be a special event that they need someone to be part of. And that's a great way also to build some of those skills as well. I think one of the most important things is you can spend forever going for certificate programs and more school, especially when you arrive, and there's a place for that. But you also have to make sure it's balanced as well, of making sure that you have what you need and going out to try and find that position. And you can always go back for more, but making sure it's balanced.
We have another excellent question from Amin Musavi, who asks, regarding cultural differences, in your experience, Brian, have you heard of any specific issues that employers, hiring managers face when they have hired a newcomer candidate who's already employed by them?
That's a great question. And it's something I've heard not from organizations that have hired newcomers, but I've heard in my work from Access Employment that I've heard from some individuals or some of the feedback that there can be sometimes some cultural differences that companies will say they want to be aware of. And I think, that's something to be aware. It really comes down mostly to communication. That's probably one of the biggest areas because sometimes there can be cultural differences in how people communicate, whether that's in the written form or in speaking. And I think that's probably the biggest area. Overall, though, I think organizations really have found that the newcomers bring a sense of energy, a sense of tremendous dedication, and a sense of newness when they are employed. And I think it's more positive on that side, 100%.
What are your recommendations, Brian, in terms of building a professional network? How do you get started? What are the do's and don'ts and best practices?
Again, like I said earlier, networking is all about relationships and seeing each person that you're connecting with as a person and someone that you want to connect with. Definitely, it might be for professional reasons, but it's not about getting. It's about being open. And that's the best way that your network can work for you. Individuals that reach out in a hardcore way of trying to just introduce themselves, make a connection, saying, I need a job. Who do you know that you might be able to introduce me to? When people do that to me, who have reached out on LinkedIn, they've sent me resumes, connecting from around the world on that, and just not taking a moment to build a relationship or make a good contact, that's a turnoff. And I think it's very important as you build a network to really be open as you begin a relationship. People will be so generous in giving you time if you approach with an openness and a generosity yourself. And I think that's very important and it will set you apart. It's also important too that when you network with individuals, follow up with them after, say thank you, touch base with them a couple months later and say, I just want to let you know I was thinking of you. I had a great interview. It went well. I'm waiting to hear back. That's how you keep your relationship and it will grow. If you're just a one-time off on building, on those contact points, it's not going to go as far. I think the other point too is are individuals in your life that you connect with that also enjoy connecting with others, ask them to introduce you to some people in their network. That is a great way to be welcomed in and to also expand. And that's really important. I certainly have done that to individuals that I respected that had an incredible network. And, they invited me to certain events or certain organizations, and that just helped build my network 100-fold over because I was open. So it's really critical to be open.
One more issue that is brought to light by Komal here from our audience. She says a lot of positions get filled up internally, and even though the position may have been listed on job boards, but it gets filled internally. And often it goes to people in volunteering positions or people already interning or already in line in queue. That's where volunteering really comes into effect, right?
It certainly can. I think, sometimes there are certain organizations by law that they have to post the position. And sometimes there is an internal candidate who may be the candidate that is the preferred candidates, but they often sometimes want to expose externally as well to see if there are external candidates. Volunteering is important, networking is important, as I said earlier, and that can have a huge impact in decisions.
Okay, so we have 15 more minutes left before we close this webinar and so many more questions to answer. We just want to assure our audience members that we will answer your questions by email if we can't take it up in the remaining time. Brian, do you want to share some personal anecdotes from your journey in recruitment, in access employment, to now Evolution, your global coaching company and what you do there?
Sure. So, everyone has a story. Every single person who's watching right now has a beautiful, profound story about who they are, where they've come from, the passion that's in each person, and how they want to bring that to Canada and their workplace and for their families. And so I founded Evolution in November, and it has been a great joy to do so. It kind of brings together all aspects of my whole life, and from my expertise and kind of my personal alignment as well. And so I named the company Evolution on purpose. It's not by mistake that it has two names. The first evolution is the natural evolution that we can't control as human beings. And the second evolution is the one that we decide how we want to evolve and who we want to evolve to be. And I think for myself, that has been something that's been very important to me in my own life and decisions that I made to how I wanted to evolve. And I think it's important to remember that we can truly accomplish and go in any direction that we want in our lives. And it's really profound. It's not always easy, but with courage that every newcomer has, and with determination and with focus, you truly evolve to where you want to be. And I think right now with COVID-19 going on, it kind of points to the first evolution. There's certain things we can't control and how that's impacting us. But it is a moment for every single person, myself included. How do we want to evolve out of this? What kind of work do we want to do? Where do we want our passion and desire to go? And I think, newcomers bring a tremendous energy and insight. And sometimes there can be a lot of insecurities that are attached, whether it's because of language or lack of skills. And all I can really say is from my experience and also my own journey, that just truly be authentic to yourself. Embrace what's different about you, because you offer something beautifully different, and how that can impact so many people, and especially professionally. People yearn for people who are authentic and bring a new perspective, a global perspective. And that's the gift of being a newcomer, not just for work, but also for what you bring as a person.
Brian, along with a positive mindset, what are the other things that help boost your profile in the eyes of employers, hiring managers? We have a question from Alejandro, from Ronak, actually, Ronak Warna, who says, just having Canadian degrees, Canadian certifications, does that help enhance your chances?
Certainly, there are certainly, different areas and different occupations that you need to have those Canadian credentials. For example, if you're a physician, an engineer, an accountant, you need to be certified in Canada, and that is definitely going to help you. If you don't have that, that will be quite challenging, I think, to enter into those professions in Canada. I think, definitely being involved in different Canadian organizations, whatever field you're in, professional organizations, that's important. Spend some money. Some of their memberships are very low. Join a professional organization, a Canadian organization in your occupation. That is very important, because that can go on your resume. Volunteer for a Canadian-based organization that is aligned maybe in the field that you're working in. That also helps quite a bit. I also think there's a lot of questions about resumes I have found newcomers bring, because sometimes formats are different, coming from different countries, etc. My number one rule about a resume is the following: it has to be easy to read. If a resume if it's single spaced or difficult to read or too much information, it's going to be a turnoff, especially as a newcomer. You want to make sure that you present who you are, you present your credentials, but it has to make sure that it's easy to read. And that's why it's very important to share that with someone who's been in Canada longer, to have them look at your CV, to make sure that it's in the right format, That's a really important thing to have as you apply for positions too.
As a follow-up to that question, Ikra Siddiqui wants to know, can we mention survival jobs on our resume? Will it work against us?
You know, I don't have an issue with survival jobs on a resume to a point, but I think it's important if you've only been here for, if it's under a year, I don't think you need to put a survival job on your resume. I think you can certainly mention during an interview process that, you know, you've been taking a bridging course, you've been building your network, you did have a Canadian job here that was just on the side while you were looking. If it's over a year, you may want to put something down like that, but I think it has to be careful, you know what I mean? Because it can throw off, especially if you're going for something in financial services and they see that, you know, Tim Hortons is listed and you're looking for a banking job. Not that there's anything the matter with that or speaking about that, but I think in the overall of the resume, it has to be very careful how it's presented. So I think it's a fine line. My rule of thumb is if it's under a year, I wouldn't put it down, but definitely feel free to speak about it during your interview process.
And coming to the appropriateness of this whole question that we started with, do you have Canadian experience? Kumail Ali wants to know whether that's appropriate, whether that's legal to ask. I believe in the Ontario Human Rights Code, it's not allowed.
So, you know, it can be shown right from your resume right away where you've worked. So I think it's very important that so they can see even without asking where you've been working. And, you know, but they can certainly ask you, gee, you know, have you been working here in Toronto? You know, where was your last place of employment? You know, so it's a statement of fact that they will be able to see in your resume where you've been working. Where it gets, where you have to be very careful, where employers have to be careful, it can't be seen as a bias. Just because someone hasn't worked here doesn't mean that you're disqualified. And I think that's where it's very important as a candidate going in, like I've said before during our conversation, that bring it up before it's brought up to you. And that will really change the tone. And that really will change the whole conversation. It may not even be an issue if you own it quite strongly in confidence at the very beginning.
Brian, we're also getting some appreciation for your work and for your organization, Evolution. Jessica Young says that she loves the meaning and the thought process behind naming your company Evolution. And then we have Melissa Lopez. She wants to know, where can we get support for maybe proofreading a resume building? Where can we get that kind of support?
Yeah, definitely. So there are organizations. So for example, you know, Access Employment has the bridging programs that they can offer some assistance there about looking at your resume, giving advice, interview skills, etc. I certainly have done some work as well with my company and, you know, helping individuals for interview prep, and helping them look at their kind of whole brand and their whole profile. There are also some smaller companies as well. There's one called Search Forward that, you know, they can meet with you to help look at your resume, help sometimes realign your resume in a different way, and also help you to have a better sense of how to present yourself. So there are organizations that are out there. Some are small, some are larger, and to really look out to them, especially now more than ever during COVID-19, especially for those of you who are on LinkedIn every day. There are so many people who are offering for free assistance to help look at your resumes, interview coaching. There's a lot of opportunities right now. If you spend the time on LinkedIn, you can probably connect with someone, you know, for no cost, for a one-time service to have someone look at that. And that's something I would take advantage of.
Right. Given that we're all at home and the opportunity to actually meet with the connections that you make virtually isn't there, you can't go for coffee or interview sessions with this, information sessions with your connections. How do you start building your work experience? You mentioned pro bono work. Is that how you start offering your skills, that I have this much experience, these many skills, how about I work for you and then maybe impress you?
Yeah, so, you know, right now is a wonderful time to be of service. And if you approach in that spirit of, being in service or pro bono, that is a great way for business development. It's also a great way for someone to understand your skills, and it really can help set you apart. And I think that's a great question and a great suggestion that definitely now is the time to be creative. And I think that's a great opportunity as well. That there's someone that who or a company or a smaller company probably be more open to it, to really invite them to say, gee, I would love to just offer my assistance during this time. Is there something I could do pro bono, something small? That's a great way to get that experience. And they can also maybe become a reference for you. Maybe they can serve as a character reference when you do go for interviews. So I think that's a really great suggestion.
What about newcomers who are in very specialized skilled fields like banking, finance? You can't really volunteer in those fields. And we have a question actually that came on YouTube regarding this. So for those kind of fields, you really have to maybe acquire local certifications and really wait it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, for certain occupations like accountants and engineers and finance as well, because there are certain different accreditations and regulations for those in finance that it may prevent them from volunteering at a certain level within that field. However, if you have a financial background, that is going to be to your advantage in terms of volunteering, maybe for a small not-for-profit, maybe it's for your local church or mosque or synagogue, maybe it is for a small organization that you could offer some pro bono service from financials, or maybe there's a small activity, fundraising activity, they need someone to help, on that side. Those are great ways to also be involved, especially if you have a financial background. It's not always easy to do that because you have a very specialized skill, but it's a way to be of service and to continue to build your network.
Brian, as we come to the close of this virtual chat, what is your parting message, your big takeaway headlining message for our viewership today in these uncertain times where a lot of companies are going through a churn, maybe new jobs will get created when things return to normal. Things are very uncertain right now. What should they keep in mind regarding their mindset and their strategic approach to applying for jobs?
So number one, you came here for a reason. And every single person who may be feeling overwhelmed right now is going to land. And you have to own that, trust that, and believe it. And you will. Number two, I think there were so many points that were shared tonight that can be very helpful. Build your network. That is so critical. Continue to reach out, but also practice. Practice every day when you're in the morning, when you're brushing your teeth, when you have a few minutes alone. Practice being asked that question at the beginning of an interview. Share with us why you're interested. How are you going to respond about presenting and bringing up your Canadian experience without having Canadian experience, but tapping into your background and your leadership? And that is truly going to help you and have that confidence as you continue your search.
Amazing, Brian. This was an excellent session. We got so many questions. I hope our viewers learned something meaningful. They're taking away tactical tips from this session with Brian. Thank you so much for giving us this 1 hour. And we hope to bring you back for more sessions on Café New Canadians. Today, we were talking about if you have no Canadian experience, how do you deal with that dilemma? And we had Brian G. Bachand, CEO and founder of Evolution. If you want to learn more about Brian's work, you can log on to evolution.com. And this session was brought to you by Café New Canadians. You can catch us on Omni Television and our social and digital media platforms. And you can also follow us on our social media channels. We bring you curated content and useful resources around education, employment, settlement, and lots more. We also have a dedicated channel on Telegram now, and that link on your screen. Connect with us. Let us know how you found today's session and what kind of topics you'd like to watch in upcoming weeks. You can also subscribe to our monthly newsletter where we'll hit your inbox with interesting content in the whole newcomer space with expert advice and tips. Thank you for watching Café New Canadians. And for all of you, also in the coming days, we'll be hosting another session on bridging programs in association with the Mennonite New Life Center. Bridging programs, a step closer to professional success. And that is the topic that we did discuss today in Brian's session. So on Tuesday, April 21, 2020, do log on to that session. Now, before you log off from Zoom, do fill in the survey that will pop up on your screen. It will help us curate more sessions like today to know how you found today's session, what kind of questions you'd like to see. Do fill in that survey and help us out. Okay, and thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back with more editions of Café New Canadians. Thank you, Brian.
Pleasure. Thank you.